Hello. All right, it works. Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us in person, and for those of you who are joining us remotely today. This is a really timely panel discussing the growing policy and marketplace momentum for addressing the long overlooked impacts of industrial logging in the global north on climate, on biodiversity, and on communities. Before I go any further, I would like to begin by acknowledging the relationships that Indigenous peoples have had with the land we are on right now, its waters, its wildlife, its plants, its medicines, and its teachings from time out of mind, and that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Mohawk and Algonquin peoples. We give thanks to the original caretakers of this land, past, present, and future, and the nations whose names we no longer remember because of colonialism. And we acknowledge that this is the stolen land and that NRDC, the organization I work with, and all of us have a duty to learn about these relationships and to do our part to address continuing injustices to the land and the people. I am Amanda Maxwell. Thank you again for being here. I am the Managing Director of the International Program of NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. For decades, all eyes have focused on the devastating deforestation in the Amazon and other tropical forests. Yet the equally vital forests of the global north have faced a quiet extinction at the same time. Industrial logging in the global north is the single largest driver of forest cover loss in the world. Canada, where we are right now, which clear cuts more than 550,000 hectares of its carbon-rich forests every year, ranks third in intact forest landscape loss, behind only Russia and Brazil. Countries like Sweden and Estonia continue to clear cut some of their most ecologically essential forests for biomass and for other products. The global north has been able to escape scrutiny because of a policy loophole. The long-standing policy landscape has focused pretty much entirely on deforestation, which is a narrowly defined term that applies primarily to industries in the tropics that actually just convert the forest to an entirely different land use, for example, agriculture or a cattle ranch. So policies have ignored the commensurate problem of forest degradation, which is broader. It captures forest loss of ecological value, even if it's replanted or allowed to regrow. Degradation actually differentiates between an irreplaceable primary forest and a stand of replanted saplings. Science has shown that those primary forests have unique value for biodiversity and for the climate. Northern countries have perpetuated myths about industrial logging's sustainability, branding it as sustainable forest management, and crafting forest carbon accounting regimes that falsely depict the logging sector as a net carbon neutral industry. Fortunately, that regime is starting to crumble. The most recent blow happening just 4 days ago this week with a landmark EU regulation that holds companies accountable for forest degradation impact, including industrial logging in primary forests. Policymakers and marketplace leaders like those who are joining us today have begun to recognize the impacts of forest degradation and bring forth groundbreaking policies to close this global policy loophole around industrial logging. From procurement and trade policies to subsidies reform, new standards for investors, and global level accountability, these panelists are building on the promise of last year's Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use, and are leading the way to a truly whole-of-planet approach to forest protection. Their policy visions present profound opportunities, not just for tackling biodiversity or fighting climate change, but also for the creation of whole new sustainable economies and a more just and sustainable future. I am thrilled to introduce this panel of amazing experts to you all today. Here we go. Ready? We're going to start. Anna McMorrin is a Welsh Labour Party politician serving as a Member of Parliament for Cardiff North since 2017. She has served as Shadow Minister for Victims and Youth Justice since 2021 and was a Shadow Minister for International Development from 2020 to 2021. She is the chair of the All-Party Parliament Group, APPG, on deforestation in the UK Parliament, and vice chair of the APP's International Conservation. Next, we have, joining us virtually, you will see her in a minute, Senator Liz Krueger from New York State Senator, who represents District 28 on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and serves as the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. She was first elected in 2002 and in the past 2 decades has been a champion of governance reform, environmental protection, animal welfare, and the rights of all New Yorkers to healthcare, social services, and housing. She is the co-sponsor of the New York Deforestation-Free Procurement Act, a landmark bill that would protect both boreal and tropical forests as well as indigenous rights. She'll be joining us from Zoom today. Sikeade Egbuwalo is the desk officer for the Convention on Biological Diversity at the Federal Ministry of Environment of Nigeria. She has been central to Nigeria's global leadership on biodiversity protection, including its strong support of 30 by 30. She has been a powerful voice calling for international finance mechanisms, oceans protections, addressing power disparities in climate negotiations. Kiran Sehra just joined us. Wonderful timing. Thank you, Kiran, is the biodiversity analyst for Aviva Investors, where she is responsible for supporting the delivery of Aviva's biodiversity policy, including conducting a biodiversity and deforestation assessment across their investments, underwriting, and operations. Kiran previously worked with the UN Environment Program World Conservation Monitoring Center on integrating biodiversity risk within private and financial sectors, and has led on the integration of deforestation risk and the use of nature-based solutions within the banking sector. Last but not least, Zoltan is the head of conservation at WildEurope. He has over 25 years of experience in nature conservation with a focus on management of protected areas, EU Natura 2000 sites, landscape planning, and forestry. Zoltan has held senior positions in national and international civil society organizations like IUCN, WWF, and in international bodies, including the World Commission on Protected Areas, and has been a tireless advocate for the protection of forests in Europe and around the world. So that is our amazing panel. I'm going to turn it over to Anna to give the first few remarks.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a great honor to be here today, and fantastic also to be here in Montreal at COP15. A real opportunity, we know, and there's a real urgency about this conference over these next days and week in terms of bringing people together, bringing those member states together to reach those critical agreements, goals, and targets. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about my perspective from the UK and what we see needing to happen. I'm in opposition. I'm an opposition minister in the UK. We hope to be in government next time. In fact, we will be in government next time. So we will be in a position to be leading some of these negotiations and sitting at the table. So some of the things I am saying now, hopefully, next time we can be there and playing a more active role. But saying that, we do work on deforestation. We work on quite a cross-party basis. And I chair, as you mentioned, I chair the all-party group on global deforestation within Parliament. That is made up of members of Parliament from across the political divide, as well as members of the House of Lords. And I think we are all of one mind that there needs to be much, much stronger legislation and a determination to do something about, firstly, stopping big business financial institutions from investing in the deforestation that we're seeing at the moment, the catastrophic deforestation, but also to do something about the deforestation that is happening currently in the global north, which is deforestation but not classed as deforestation. So you have what's classed as forests, but it's just wide, empty expanse. And that is doing huge, huge damage. We heard this morning, we met with members or the Grand Chief of the Cree indigenous people, who was very, very outspoken and powerful in the demand for indigenous people to be recognized. That is something that in Parliament, members of the cross-party group are really passionate about. Across the world, we need indigenous rights recognized. I met yesterday with the Wampis Nation. They live they're from Peru. They have been guardians of their land, as have the Cree, for thousands and thousands of years. They are the ones who know best how to manage and safeguard their land, yet they are being exploited. And we heard this morning how, and the Wampis Nation tell me that the people from there, and I met them last year in Glasgow as well, they would give their lives for their land. And that is such a powerful statement. And I don't think we, in the first world, really understand how powerful that statement is and how meaningful that statement is when people's rights are being eroded away, but they are seeing it on a day-by-day basis. So this summer, for example, the Wampis Nation had an oil spill from a pipeline that has been built right the way through across their land, destroying huge swathes of their area. They are very concerned that this 30 by 30 target is actually going to just ride roughshod over their land, their protected land, by country states just saying, well, we will designate these lands for areas of protected land, which doesn't address the rights of indigenous people. So that's what I want to see. I want to see, and in the UK, we are fighting to see indigenous people and those from the developing world as well. And I was in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh just last month on climate, but also on biodiversity. We need to see these community groups with a seat at the table, being able to express and to be able to fight for their rights at the UN table. We are all too ready to legislate and determine what is right for others without actually allowing them to self-determine what and where and how they should act. So in terms of legislation, and in terms of UK legislation, we're still fighting our government, the UK government, on introducing far tougher measures so that we can see illegal deforestation targeted. Not only that illegal deforestation from the point of view of the country that it's in, but also from our country. So illegal, legal deforestation should be outlawed. We tried, sadly this week we didn't succeed, but we tried to introduce an amendment to a bill just a few days ago in the UK Parliament, which would do that. So we will keep trying at every available opportunity. And just finally, I want to say a few words about the UK And we met yesterday with DEFRA officials who were here negotiating and supporting their ministers. The UK talks the talk in their ambition, in our ambition. Talks about being a leader in renewables, talks about being a leader on biodiversity, talks about being a leader in diplomacy the world over. And to a certain extent, and in some areas, that may be true. But when you've got a country, in a country where you've got a company like Drax, which is receiving over £2 million of state subsidies every day, which is a huge amount, in order to import biomass, contributing to global deforestation, I can't see how we can be a world leader. We need to be acting decisively and showing, demonstrating in our own backyard that we can show that leadership. And until we do that, I don't think we can be in a position to say to others what they should be doing. So we will, as opposition, continue that fight. And as Labour, we will have a position and ready to act on Drax to encourage carbon capture and storage at the very minimum, but limiting that subsidy, making sure that there are alternatives for renewable energy, making sure we're not reliant on opening a new coal mine, which some of you may have heard has just been announced in the last few days. We need to be sustainable and green, but we need to make sure that our policies overseas, our imports, our demand for those imports and biomass is reducing in a very serious way, so that we can be those global players on the world stage that can show the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You just touched on so many of the issues that I'm hoping we can all dig into a little bit more. The relationship between policy and investment, global equity, the connection between biodiversity and climate. So that was wonderful. Thank you. Next, Sikeade, would you like to give your remarks?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this event on the development of bold policy to strengthen forest protection. And before I go deep into my remarks, I want to commend the Senator on her intervention. I like the fact that someone from the UK is coming out to say, yes, we are ambitious, but it's time we walk the talk. And I think I would like you to engage your negotiators more on that, because we have seen ambition being raised by even developed countries that should be scared of taking ambition. And it's time for developed countries to up their games in terms of ambition. Ambition should be ambition all through, and not just ambition on one target and you leave the rest of the target without being ambitious. So thank you for that. And back to my remarks. My country is located in the West African region of Africa and is rich in wildlife and forest biodiversity. The 15 members of the ECOWAS host approximately about 66 million hectares of forest, and this corresponds to 13% of the total land area of West Africa. The forests in West Africa are fundamental to improving the livelihoods of our people. Most of our people depend on the resources in the forest as their main source of wood, energy, timber, lumber, and a lot of other things. They also provide the locals with a variety of non-timber forest products and that contribute to improving food security. We have a lot of food product coming out of our forest, and some of them we even import to other parts of the world. And in spite of the rate of deforestation across the region, we have about 704,000 hectares of land area being recorded as forest loss cover every year. So in Nigeria, between 2001 to 2021, we've lost about 1.4 million hectares of our forest cover, which is equivalent to about 11% of decrease in tree cover since 2000. And as government, we've been trying to respond to this forest crisis that we have. And ECOWAS countries came together and agreed to work on protecting and managing our region's forest and wildlife through the Convergence Plan for Sustainable Management and Use of Forest Ecosystem in Nigeria, in West Africa. This was adopted in 2013, and now we are currently updating it. Then our countries have committed significantly into reforestation activities. My country especially plans to increase forest cover to a quarter of its landmass. We have made a lot of commitment, and we are working to implementing this commitment. And as part of broader African Forest Landscape Initiation, we seek to restore 100 million hectares of degraded lands by 2030. And through various initiatives, one of them being the Afri 100 initiative that we belong to. Then, of course, the African region is the most vulnerable to climate change. I've said it in various meetings and events that I've attended. And so we are also the most vulnerable to species loss, to biodiversity loss, and any other environmental degradation you can think of. And because of this, we have been hit hard. And I'm sorry to say this, but high-income countries are most responsible for most of these catastrophes. They emit the carbon while we feel the impact. In my country alone, about 3 months ago, we had this serious issue of flooding that we've not had in many years. And we had over 1 million people being displaced due to this flood situation. And we cannot just sit idle while all our natural ecosystem just disappear over what we do not know about because of some people's way of life. And it is for this reason that the ECOWAS, we are taking this negotiation seriously, and we are taking ambition. We are taking ambition very high in the global biodiversity framework negotiation, and that's why you see the passion when any of these countries in my sub-region takes the floor, because it's something. We are nature. We ourselves are nature. We live in it. We depend on it, and that's why you see this passion when we take the floor to negotiate. On goal A, on target 2, sorry, goal A, we're expecting extinction to be altered from now. It was shocking. I remember meeting UK minister in Lisbon, and I had indicated to him that he needs to tell his team to up their ambition on goal A, when UK was requesting for extinction to be altered by 2030. I mean, what's the ambition in there from the global north? So we want to see ambition being up in this process in such a way that the ambition is commensurate to the level of the degradation that we are experiencing. And also, my sub-region has launched an appeal for an ambitious global response to the biodiversity crisis. And the appeal is urgent and well-focused and articulate. Through this appeal, we have identified several measures as essential, and that includes the 30% global designation of lands and seas, and also a conclusion of a robust INUC treaty. We are hoping to have that done next year, February. And also, we are pushing for the establishment of highly and fully protected areas. We believe it's not just about designating new areas, but also we need to ensure the quality of the protection that we're all armoring for. And also, we are calling on a commitment to reduce and halt global forest loss, including through restoration of 350 million hectares of land by 2030, as found in Dakar Declaration on Forest Landscape Restoration. We can no longer afford to lose our momentum in endless debate while we just sit and do a lot of talk without putting actions into our talk. It is time for the high-income countries, the EU, US, Canada, to agree to meaningfully protect 30%, because, I mean, they came to us with this idea and we just felt it was great. We think it's it's an action that we need to face the biodiversity crisis, then sitting with them at the table and we see them lowering their ambition, that sends a wrong signal to us. And for too long, they have expected Africans and others to take significant action to conserve our biodiversity. But while they continue to cut down their forests and degrade their lands, something has to be done and change has to happen, and it has to happen right now. Then experts know that in order to address the biodiversity loss, we need to increase our funding ambition. We need to increase our investment in nature by providing between 500 and 900 billion per year. Nigeria didn't do these studies. It was done by developing country members. And it was given to us. We went through it and we think, oh, it's good that we identify the gap, the financial gap that is needed to implement this framework. So ambition in Target 3 is ambition in finance. It is our ambition on addressing biodiversity loss must be matched with funding commitment. Within our region, we have started developing guidance, and we have shown the lead by, without having the finance, we've come to put together our guidance on implementing the framework, and that shows a lot of commitment from our sub-region. And what we need to urgently strengthen and expand our protected areas in Africa, in West Africa. I can share the appeal with you and also the guidance that we have developed for those of you that might be interested in working with us. And of course, we need the fund, but our governments are committed to also implement this framework. And beyond the funding, because I keep saying it is not just, I'm not one of those people that come to beg for money. We should also look for a way to mobilize finance within our system as well, and not just waiting on someone to give us the money. Of course, we need them to pay for the damage they've done to the environment. But while we are waiting on them to do that, and that's why we've been calling for the 1% GDP to be mobilized, and that's more like making everyone responsible, not just waiting on the global north to bring money to the down south, but we're also expecting the global south to also put some commitment into financing biodiversity. And we need our income countries to put in place measures that limit biodiversity loss and climate emissions in their countries. But they should demonstrate their own commitment to address our common threats, because we feel the impact of their actions. And it must include measures that compel forest protection. Through my participation in this event, I want to urge every one of you to support us, and I want to urge you to also strengthen the protection of forests in your own region as well. We have one planet, we share the resources, and it is time for us all to unite and work together for the ambition. Thank you.
Thank you. There was, oh my gosh, so much there. Thank you for underscoring the need for ambition. I think that's something everybody in this room and probably virtually who's watching agrees is something that is urgent and critically important right now. And the role of funding and where is that funding going to come from is such a big question. You know, at this COP15, also at COP27, we saw that was a major issue there with the loss and damage conversation. So thank you. And then one last thing I want to highlight that you mentioned was the role of ECOWAS as a regional, I mean, each country's own actions and commitments are very important, but also looking to regions across political boundaries for some solutions and efforts together. So thank you very much for those wonderful remarks. Moving now to our virtual participant, Senator Liz Krueger. Are you with us on Zoom?
Hi, can you hear me? Folks, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great, good. Sorry I can't be with you in Montreal, and I'm very honored to be invited to be part of this panel, because like my other colleagues on this panel and the introductory comments, I understand that this is a critical issue for climate change around the world, and I have taken to starting or ending all conversations and all meetings as a senator, no matter what the topic people bring to me and they think we're talking about, I remind them that if they weren't focusing on climate change issues as well, then truthfully, whatever they're here to lobby me on may not be relevant in a couple of years, because if we don't get this right, we aren't going to be around to deal with all the other issues we are trying to get right. I want to thank NRDC, Friends of the Earth, Rainforest Relief. I'm trying to think who else I have worked with, Sierra Club, and so many other environmental climate change organizations in the development of my piece of legislation here in New York. And I appreciate hearing from the representative of the EU in England discussing, she's in the opposition party, but hoping to be in the majority party in her government very soon, and I hope so also. But I'll tell you, I'm now also in the majority party in my house, I guess going on 4 years, and it still isn't easy to get these pieces of legislation through, even when you're in the party control of legislatures. So I am trying one more time, come in January 23, with an updated version of a bill we've called the New York Deforestation-Free Procurement Act. Now, something I think no one else has said yet, but I want to highlight and certainly complements everything that was said, is the reason companies are destroying our forests, destroying our rainforests, taking apart our boreal forests and throughout the world, is because countries like my own want to buy the products that they're selling. It's as simple as that. Our consumer demand for these products is driving the destruction of our forests. And so we, the countries disproportionately that are driving demand and buying the products, need to take responsibility for either out and out outlawing of the buying of those products and importing into our country, or at minimum start with individual actions at the state, which is like in Canada, province at the state level, or focus on the contracting and buying by government of these products. So my bill is not very radical. It says that New York State's government cannot do business with vendors who are selling us consumer products and commercial products for government that are made up of things stolen from the boreal forests, or things that the boreal forests are being cleared of their trees from so that something else can replace it that we want to buy. So I think it's very important, as I have been working on the bill for several years, and we do keep amending, we keep talking to the Canadian government, because they seem to be exceptionally concerned that they would be included in this bill. And it's true, Canada, much of the time, can proudly point to its better environmental standards than my country, the United States of America. But we do have a fairly strong disagreement on the issue of the use of lumbering in the boreal forests of Canada. And I am sorry that I did not get to see the presentation by the head of the Chi Nation, but I had the opportunity to meet with her when she was here in New York City for United Nations Week. And we had a really wonderful conversation about the work that Indigenous people of Canada are doing to try to protect and steward their land. And I had an opportunity to meet with Indigenous people who were visiting my country from Brazil and from Southeast Asia. And the themes are extraordinarily parallel, no matter where in the world you're talking about, that basically often US companies or other Western European nations, companies are moving in, taking over with agreements from other governments, it's true, but nonetheless, they're coming in, taking over, and destroying these forests that the indigenous communities have worked so hard to hold on to protect, and to even work hard to reverse the degradation and deforestation that has already taken place. So if my bill is successful in passing, it will tighten some existing state bans on the use of tropical hardwoods for government projects, create a new statute requiring state contractors who deal in forest risk commodities have to certify that their products don't drive tropical or boreal deforestation or degradation, that we have expanding the list of key forest risk commodities, including replacement of the forest with beef production, palm oil, coffee, chocolate, wood products, and I believe we're adding mining because we have heard of such horrible stories with tearing forests down, not necessarily intending to sell the products, although I'm sure they do get sold, but to make land for mining, which adds to so many additional problems for the communities where this is going on. We absolutely believe that if New York State, one of the largest states in the United States, goes down this road, that we will see other states do the same very quickly and can start to build some real momentum. And it also will serve to educate vendors who are buying these products, local governments around the country, and citizens overall to understand the impact when we buy or we don't buy the consumer goods, and people start to understand that their actions, for the good or the bad, are having such enormous devastating impacts on other parts of the world. So I'm hoping that 2023 is going to be a good year for my efforts in the New York State legislature. We need to, in the US, in most states, you need a bill to pass both houses of your legislature, the Senate, which is the upper house where I represent, and the Assembly, considered the lower house or the people's house, where you need bills to pass both houses and then the governor to sign but not veto the legislation. So there's quite a few steps to get through, but it absolutely has been an educational process. Luckily for me, there is an enormous universe of advocacy organizations fighting on climate change issues in the state of New York. And thanks to their help, I have an incredibly long list of organizations who have signed on endorsing my legislation and who are out there lobbying on the legislation. We also have many Canadian organizations supporting, including Action Boreal, David Suzuki Foundation, Nature Quebec, Stand Earth, Environmental Defense, Nature Canada, Canopy, the Wilderness Committee, and Greenpeace Canada. I choose to mention all of the Canadian organizations as opposed to the much, much longer list of world and American organizations and businesses, because in my meetings with Canadian representatives, and they have been very open to meeting, and I appreciate that, and I'm trying to say yes to any meeting they ask me to come to, but in my discussions with the provincial governments of Canada and the federal government in Canada, they keep telling me everybody in Canada is good with what they're doing and that they have reasonable standards and there's nobody complaining. So I think it's crucial for me in my own advocacy for my bill at home and to build support in the US, that people understand that this is a world issue, that incredibly large numbers of people everywhere are looking at this issue and calling upon governments to take the actions they need, including, with all due respect to my friends in Canada, not-for-profit organizations, advocacy groups, scientific professionals, and Indigenous tribal governments throughout Canada are also in support of my bill because they agree that Canada really needs to up their game, so to speak, as does most of the world, by the way, but they need to up their game specifically around protecting the boreal forests of Canada. So I think maybe I'm going to stop there and let us just hear from more people and take questions. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate today and for setting up a Zoom mechanism so that I can join you even if I'm not physically with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. That was great, and we wish you were here in person as well. But your comments transcend geography right now. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on this bill. I know it is a lot of work, and we're thrilled that you're going to reintroduce it in 2023. One thing that you said that really stuck with me was this bill's not really very radical. Which in my mind, I thought, of course not, it's just responsible. But in the US, it is a groundbreaking bill, and I think there are a lot of people who would consider it radical. So thank you for all of that work, and we look forward to getting some questions your way as well. Next, we'll turn to Zoltan for your thoughts.
Okay, it works. Thanks very much for inviting me as well to the speech, or to this event. I prepared a few slides, but basically I could even scrap them and just reflect on what the previous speaker said. First of all, it might sound really strange that forests are really in a dire condition in Europe. Most people think that in Europe the forest cover is increasing, and that's true, but this is only one of the indicators. And actually, forest is not the same as tree plantations. So a bunch of trees together will never make a forest. And I think that's a very important message I would like to bring here together. And in Europe, as you can see on my slide, 14% of the forest habitats are only in favorable conservation status. And these are the ones within protected areas. So within protected areas, only 14% of the forest habitats are in favorable conservation status. How on earth anyone can think that we are in a good condition in Europe in terms of forest? And yeah, I'm not a policymaker. I'm kind of an advocacy guy working for an NGO. And I was thinking why a Hungarian should speak about European policy. Maybe I can say that I already mentioned to Anna earlier that my son lives in the UK, my daughter-in-law is Dutch, my daughter lives in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I live in Hungary. So the young and the current generation is really, really European. So I really feel being allowed to speak on behalf of this youth and young generation. Next slide, please. One important message again, which I really would like to bring together. It was already mentioned again, Anna, I think you said that you were in the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's really important that we have to see these two conventions not as separate conventions. We have to see the two, the forest or the Convention on Biodiversity and the Convention, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, as two parallel conventions that should work together. We have been talking about money as well, and it's in the past 3 days, the reason why I'm here in Montreal is obviously CBD COP15. And in the past 3-4 days since I'm here, most people said that there will be no agreement because of the discussion on money. And two of you said something really interesting. You said that in the UK, Drax receives 2 million British pound every single day as a subsidy. That's roughly, I think, about €1 billion a year. And NRDC has made a study about 3 years ago where you analyzed 17 European countries that spent €3 billion on helping companies, big companies, to burn wood. So if we already have 1% of the money that is needed for biodiversity, if this €3 billion is redirected simply to nature conservation rather than helping big companies to burn wood. Let me check where we are now. Yeah, okay, maybe we can go to the, and next one, please, next slide. Maybe you can press it twice, actually. So the burning wood is not really a solution, and in Europe we have a very vivid policy environment. We have the EU, as you praised, the deforestation law, which is actually quite good, but We also have an EU biodiversity strategy, which is a soft law. We have a forest strategy, and the foresters are paranoid about the forest strategy because they feel that this will take power over forest from their hand, and it will give it to the environmentalists. And one of the other law that is currently under discussion is the Renewable Energy Directive. And that's the directive which allows states to actually finance the burning of primary woody biomass as a renewable energy source. This is what we argue it should be stopped. This is a false solution because it harms climate and it also harms biodiversity protection. Next slide, please. And it's not only the NGOs or the conservation organizations that say that this is not a solution. It's also some of the companies, the wood manufacturers, exactly say the same. They say because of the overuse of timber for burning and for energy, actually makes the raw material as a scarce material. And we should prioritize the use of wood for materials and not for energy. Next slide, please. And then I'm really very soon at the end. Another thing that really caught my attention was what you said about Nigeria. 1.6 million hectare of forest cover was lost. I came from Hungary. We have 2 million hectares of forest in Hungary. So you almost lost all the forest that we have in Hungary, which is really, really tragic. And I think every single person should recognize that. And I think where again European policy comes in, that a lot of European policies are actually driving deforestation outside Europe. Also in the Southeast United States, where a lot of timber that is cut in Southeast United States is actually burned in Europe. And that's tragic. This is why we need to change our policies in Europe. One other important element here, you can see on the slide that the carbon sink in the land sector diminishes in Europe, especially in the forest sector. And one figure I would like to put here, which is not on the slide, everyone can read the slide, so it's better to say something else. As I mentioned, in Hungary we have 2 million hectares of forest, and I put it in quotation mark because only 353 hectares is natural forest. All the rest are plantation or semi-natural forest. Even if I would consider the semi-natural forest, it's only 20% of the statistical forest cover would be in this category. All the rest are plantations, native and very often non-native trees. Next slide, please. And the energy sector usually say that, or very often say that salvage logging is something that can feed burn the power plants. But we say salvage logging is also not a solution. It's actually, if you can press the button for the next slide, the GRC, the Joint Research Center of Europe, of the European Union, made a research about a year ago in which they also confirmed that salvage logging is actually not a solution because it undermines the biodiversity commitment. It's not beneficial for climate change either because it will, whenever we burn tree, the carbon is emitted in the atmosphere immediately, and the trees or the forest needs several decades or centuries to actually reabsorb this carbon. And salvage logging in Europe is very often used for illegal logging, actually. So therefore we say salvage logging is not a solution. It should not be considered as a food source for the industry or the energy sector. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. Basically, this is the message, or no, one before maybe. No? Okay. That's the slide which I brought here, which shows basically from the NRDC report about the huge sum of money that we spend on subsidizing big companies to or power plants to burn wood. And again, the key message here, if we redirect that subsidy to nature conservation or to biodiversity, we already have 1% of the money that is needed to deliver the CBD commitment, to have an ambitious goal, which here we say 30% by 2030. So we think that in the global biodiversity framework, it's really important to prioritize protection of primary ecosystems. We must aim to restore ecosystem integrity, and we need to have a cooperation between the UNFCCC and the CBD. Otherwise, the two conventions will have conflicting targets that will lead basically on lose-lose ended both convention. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Zoltan. That was wonderful. And I like how you emphasize that some solutions that are out there, like salvage logging or plantations, are not actually the answers that we need right now. So I'd love to dig into that a little bit more with you. Kiran, you're up next, but Anna does have to leave first. So before we get to your remarks, I would like to just quickly slip in a quick question for you, Anna, and then feel free to move on. I know you have a busy schedule. The UK really was the convening leader behind the creation of the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use. And here we are a year later. What role can the UK play now in ensuring the implementation of this really important agreement, and including for northern forests?
Yeah. Thank you. Try and get this to work. There we are. Yeah, thank you, and apologies for having to leave slightly earlier. I think it was the UK showed quite a lot of leadership at COP26 in terms of that agreement at Glasgow, and it was a difficult COP, and it was delayed, obviously. But I think since then, very little has happened. So it was a good declaration. It was a good agreement to have come to a year ago, but I'm not quite sure where the leadership has gone on that. We had our COP president, Alok Sharma, he was in the cabinet. He was not only was he COP president, he took questions on the floor of the House of Commons, and he was given autonomy to show that leadership, and he actually did. Just to show we talk kindly about our opposition party sometimes, that actually he did quite a good job in bringing people together. It wasn't quite the result we wanted in terms of climate at all, but we had this declaration. Now, subsequently, I'm sure you've all heard of the chaos in the UK politics that has transpired with subsequent prime ministers. And Alok Sharma was sacked from the cabinet, and he literally a week before COP27, he was stood down as a minister, and he was stood down from cabinet. He stayed as COP president just until the end of COP27. So that, I'm afraid, shows you the really poor response from the UK government in terms of global ambition. We also had circumstances where the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said he wasn't even going to go to COP27. Now, pressure was put on him, and he did go for a day. But there is very little climate leadership, and that's the same for biodiversity. I hope that things will turn around. We've got UK ministers arriving this next week. I hope that some impetus then will be put into the talks in terms of that Glasgow Declaration, and we can see some sorts of progression from there, because the UK really needs to step up and play a role, because we do have, we need to take responsibility for what was agreed in Glasgow. So I fully hope so. We'll be putting pressure from opposition on UK ministers, and we'll continue to do so. So we'll see.
Thank you. Please keep the pressure on. Thank you for joining us. We understand you have to leave, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah. So we've heard from policymakers, activists, government. Next up, someone from the investment community. Kira, again, thank you for coming directly from the airport. You get a gold star for that. But please, the floor is yours.
Great. Is this working? Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having me. And yes, apologies for being a little late, but we made it here in time. I just wanted to thank my fellow panelists for providing a really good background and kind of scene setting to what we're talking about here today. So I won't dive too much into why we're here, because it's pretty obvious. But just touching upon the business case, I mean, we as a society impact and depend on nature and its ecosystem services, and around half of the world's GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature and its ecosystem services. So we, as a financial investor, have a responsibility as part of society to make sure that we understand our impacts and dependencies of nature. And part of that, of course, is forests. So we've touched upon the twin crises, climate change and biodiversity loss, and we simply cannot address either without addressing deforestation. So last year we signed the financial sector letter on eliminating commodity-driven deforestation in our portfolios by 2025, and that was at COP26. And part of that commitment is understanding our exposure to deforestation risk. And you've mentioned that we've done that assessment across our investment portfolio, our underwriting activities, and our direct operations. So very happy to touch base on that later. But that really sets the scene on what financial institutions are trying to do to address this type of risk. We've done this alongside another 30 financial institutions. And really, why we think this is such an important issue is that we need to address this risk because it's, as I mentioned, really important for biodiversity and climate change. So as part of signing this letter, we've done the assessment. It's now also working on engagement. So we engage with companies in our portfolio on lots of different types of ESG risk. And of course, one of them is deforestation. So that's something that we're working together with other investors, and we've created a finance sector deforestation action working group. Lots of acronyms going about today, but this working group aims to target the companies and financial institutions which have highest deforestation risk according to NGO databases, and that's what we're working on at the moment alongside other investors. We've also touched upon the US letters, so the Forest Act, the California bill, and the New York bill. And really, in regards to kind of the relationship with the financial institutions, is these bills are going to bring transparency to investors on what companies are doing in regards to deforestation. So part of it is enhancing traceability and transparency along the agricultural supply chain. And for an investor, that really makes a difference in understanding how companies are performing in regards to deforestation risk and how they are addressing unsustainable land management issues. So that's something that came about the Investors Policy Dialogue on Deforestation, which we're a part of. And that's where we, through this initiative, we try and engage with countries such as Brazil and Indonesia, and also consumer goods countries which have high number of those sectors, in addressing this type of risk with governments themselves. So there is the engagement part of addressing deforestation risk within financial institutions, but we also need the regulatory environment to facilitate that. And so it goes hand in hand, and we want to support governments in creating these kind of regulatory environments to facilitate this type of transition. And with the kind of mandatory requirements that are being set out in some of these bills, I mean, voluntary actions alone will not provide the action needed to transition towards a nature positive and net zero society and world. So we really need to go hand in hand and work with the regulatory environment to help move towards that. And that's something that we're advocating for in Montreal for the COP15. So we have Target 14 and 15, which are more pertinent to financial institutions, and we want to push for that mandatory disclosure of impacts and dependencies assessments for businesses and financial institutions.
Thank you. That was a great perspective and a wonderful complement to everything else we've heard. I have so many questions for all of you. This is going to be hard. Before I dive into questions, I'm just curious to know how much time we have left. 15 minutes. Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, then I'm going to open it up to a question for all of you right now. A lot of the focus, this is sort of building off of actually what you just said here about needing a strong regulatory environment, and thanks to efforts like that of Senator Krueger that we heard about earlier and others, we're starting to get there, I think. But a lot of the focus when we talk about new regulations or new standards is that they're so burdensome. They're so hard to implement, right? It's really difficult. I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm curious to know, instead of focusing on the burdens, what are the opportunities that you all see with the potential for these kinds of regulations? What do you think could be a real high point with where we can go? And I'm going to start by maybe bringing it over to Senator Krueger, just for a change of scenery.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm a change of scenery. So I have to say, I think multiple states or multiple countries taking a look at my bill and saying, we should do the same thing, would be incredibly valuable and really give a real kickstart to the idea of recognizing the consumer side of the problem and what can be done about it. Because I certainly have seen any number of times in my career here in the United States, if enough of us individually as states decide to go down the same path together, it's not very long before everybody decides that's the right direction to go. And if you're consistent with the standards, rules, and regulations that you actually do pass into local law, state law, it's amazing how quickly that just becomes the accepted norm, and businesses recognize it is in their best interest to keep the business deals with government, and they don't want to have two sets of standards. So even if you're only regulating government contracted purchases, it's amazing how you can see business models that say, we don't want to have two different sets of rules and regs about who we buy from and what we buy. So since we know we have to do this for the government contracts we don't want to lose, let's just do this for everything. And so there's a very strong potential for a domino impact on the businesses when government takes initial action to get going. So I just think, as long as we're in an international conference here, the more people who are thinking down the same road, the faster I think we can get there.
Great, I like that idea of a domino impact. Kira, Sikeade, Zoltan, do you guys have thoughts on this? Please jump in.
Okay, is it okay now? So for me, I think we should put all stakeholders at the center of policy making. Because if you put a bill together and during preparation you don't involve the necessary actors that will implement this bill, then you are going to have a difficulty in ensuring its implementation. So I think that's the one important thing for me. Putting the relevant actors at the center of policy making and bill formulation is important, because it's another thing for policymakers to sit down and make policies without bringing in the actors in the process. Because you can easily sit and make a policy if you are not at the other end of the table. You may not have an understanding of how things are done from a business perspective, for instance, or from a perspective of a local person. So bringing the necessary actors to the center of the table at the policy formulation initial stage, I think it's really important. We've seen how that has played out in our country, and I think it's important for everyone to put that into consideration when they are making some of these policies. Thank you.
Yeah, it works. Okay. If I remember correctly, you asked about what opportunities lie, and I'd like to recall what you said at the introduction. You commemorated the First Nation or the indigenous community who used to be the landowner. I think the opportunity is that in 2100, we will be, or someone will be able to say the same. So the opportunity is about, in a way, survival. I mean, there is this movie, Don't Look Up, which was used about a week ago in the European Parliament in a kind of fake trial to look at how the European Union is doing with forest policies. And during that fake trial, one of the MEPs, Villaninisto, said that actually we can have more regulation, and only those companies that are too conservative, inflexible, these are the ones that they are going to complain about the new regulations. The real flexible one, those that are innovative, will just adopt to the new situation. So I don't really see the problem of getting more regulations or tougher regulation, because eventually we talk about our own survival or the survival of our children or grandchildren. Sorry to use this kind of emotional anger, but what the hell? I mean, we try to get all the other species, including us, to survive here.
If I could just add to that last point that you made, I think, introducing a kind of regulatory environment will provide a level playing field for companies in terms of what they should be addressing and disclosure and traceability. But also those leading companies which have the ambition to create kind of innovative products. We're seeing, waste products being used as an input for a lot of business processes. That can provide a real opportunity for business innovation and kind of opportunities within circular economy, which is what we need for a sustainable future and a net positive future. So from that perspective, I think it will also help facilitate that.
Great. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please hop up. I believe there's a microphone right there.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if that's on.
Oh, yes.
It is? Okay. All right. Great panel. Thank you, NRDC, for putting this together. My name is Dominic De La Salle. I'm the Chief Scientist at WildHeritage. I've got two quick questions. One is for the distinguished senator. I'm an expatriate of New York, so I live in Oregon now. And I wanted to applaud her for that legislation. It's wonderful that we've got such an informed decision maker that is taking on this issue. So I wonder how she feels the chances of her bill are now with the recent midterm elections concluding. So that's my first question. The second question I have is for the investment. Wonderful presentation as well. I was really quite interested to see if the kinds of investments that you're looking at not only are trying to get off of deforestation, but forest degradation. That's really key in the forests of the North, because it's as much a degradation issue. In fact, it probably is more a degradation issue than an absolute loss of all forest cover permanently. So it's just something to think about, because all I heard was deforestation. I didn't hear degradation. So thanks.
Hi, so I'll take your question for me, and then actually I have to run, unfortunately, at 4:30.
Senator Krueger, would you like to go ahead and answer that question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I will answer, and then unfortunately I have to run. The answer is I am pretty optimistic after the elections we just had. Many of us were very fearful of what we call a red wave in the last election cycle. And we did lose a couple of Democrats in our legislative bodies, but we actually have two supermajority democratically controlled houses now in New York, with technically a brand new Democratic governor. She came in the last 1 year. of the last cycle. We have a more progressive, more conscientious around environmental issues, new group of legislators coming in both houses who I think will catch on to this kind of legislation more quickly than some of the people who left. We are technically awaiting the announcement of both chairs of the ENCON committee, the most relevant committee for this legislation. Our chair in the Senate retired, so we're waiting to see who the new one is. And the Assembly, the other house's ENCON chair, unfortunately did lose his election to a Republican. So we have a new universe of people to work with. But we start session January 4th or 5th, so it's definitely one of the first bills I'm going to be pushing. Thank you.
I think it's working. So in regards to lag and degradation, so the commitment that we made does focus on commodity-driven deforestation. So it's looking at conversion and total depletion of forests. So within the companies that we hold, we focus on that type of commodity-driven deforestation. We have engaged with companies where it's in their agricultural supply chain, or if they're linked to, like you said, this kind of area in our arboreal forests. There are cases where we engage with them on land degradation. At the moment, it's very difficult to get data on deforestation risk, but also land degradation risk. So what we do as part of kind of the process when engaging with a company is that we do a qualitative due diligence process, and we use kind of NGO reports to identify what kind of ESG issue that is. So if it is pertinent to the company, then we would engage on land degradation as well.
So that's really important. It's good to hear, if I may, because a lot of companies will argue that what they're doing is they're just cutting down trees and then replanting, so it's a no net loss. When in fact, I don't know if Michael is still here, but if you get a chance to see that film that he did on the boreal, it's shocking what's happening in the boreal forest in Canada. And they're just going to claim, hey, we're cutting down trees, but we're planting 2 or 3 trees for every one we cut down, even though the ecosystem's been devastated and the cultures that are linked to that and ecosystem services are taking on the loss. So it's just something to think about. Also, working with Jen on some mapping that we're going to be doing in Ontario and Quebec to try to get at that question that you're asking. So at some point, it might be good to do some follow-up, because I think we might be able to help.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds good. We'd be happy to connect after.
Yeah, yeah, it works. Okay, I wanted to comment on this, Dominic, because I think this is really a burning issue also in Europe, in the Northern Hemisphere. The European Commission is trying to put together a forest monitoring law, which of course the forestry industry opposes very, very strongly, because they don't want us to face the truth. I think that's the simple answer from me. Again, using the example of Hungary, I mentioned 2 million hectares of forest, and again, in quotation mark forest. I mean, these are not real forests. 25% of our forest is actually black locust, Robinia pseudoacacia, which is a Northern American species. Has nothing to do with Hungary. It's these forests should not be called forests, but only tree farms or tree plantations, and we need to reform the land use statistics, I think, and then we would be able to see actually how much real forest we have. The Forest Europe publication is also worth checking, because something like 2/3 of Europe's forests are even-aged and includes only like 1 or 2, or I think maximum 3 tree species. I mean, this is ridiculous. These areas should not be called as forest. And that's, I think, one of the missing element of the Glasgow Declaration that was mentioned earlier, because that deals really with deforestation, which again, I understand Nigeria and in other countries, this is really a burning issue. But again, in order to cover all the problems with forest, we need to recognize that the Glasgow Declaration, when it mentions land degradation, it should specify that it means forest degradation.
I see one more question from the back, and then I think, unfortunately, we'll have to wrap it up. But please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Alexandre Berthaud. I'm an entrepreneur, actually, and what we do is we have a tool for biomonitoring. So it's environmental DNA, but in the air instead of the water, which most people know. And so the question I have for you is, what kind of data do you think is needed in terms of species to basically differentiate between, forest plantation, because typically you'll have very little biodiversity in there, and like a real primary forest or secondary forest. So the question is about data. Which data do you think you need to improve what each of you is doing? That's the question.
Great question. Please.
Is it a question to me specifically or for all of us? Yeah, maybe I answer first. There is an EU-funded project called Bottoms Up that looks into developing a multi-taxa measurement for sustainable forest management, because the problem currently in Europe is that very often we only measure sustainability with the harvest increment ratio. If we leave more wood or the increment is higher than the harvesting ratio, then it's sustainable. No, it isn't. So we need a multi-taxa monitoring system for forest, and I think we need to combine field measures with satellite or remote sensing as well. I guess there was one project that I was participating in. They could detect if a forest has a higher chance to be an old growth or a primary forest just based on satellite images when they compared it with field information. So they try to combine the two.
Kira?
In regards to the eDNA, I think a lot of the products that I've seen out there are confirming presence or absence of certain species. I think what would be really useful is to understand the state of nature over time. So if you're able to have a time period to which you can understand whether the species is going up or down, as opposed to just presence or absence.
So what we do is we keep sampling in the same spot year after year at the same time of period of the year, and what you can start seeing is either biodiversity gain or loss in terms of species. So not abundance of a species, but a least of species. So the cliff is so bad that you can actually see the things in short periods of time.
Okay, thank you. For me, it's a bit difficult for me to tell. First, I'm not a data expert, and I'm not into forest data. But I'll say for my country, the forests we have are basically primary forests. We do not classify plantation as forest, where I come from. So it's difficult for me. If it's a data expert in my ministry that is sitting here, she may be able to tell you the kind of data they use in classifying. But we do not classify plantation as forest. They are quite different. We don't see them as forest. What we have in West Africa basically are primary forests, and that's what we call forest, where I come from. Thank you.
Great. Well, unfortunately, I think we are out of time. Thank you all for joining us in the room virtually, to our panelists. This is a really important and, again, timely conversation. Thank you all for your incredible work to protect forests in Canada, in Brazil, in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in Europe, in Hungary, wherever, all around the globe. We really hope COP15 can shift this global paradigm, close this policy loophole I mentioned in the beginning, and we're really grateful to have your voices informing the creation of this next decade of action. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.